Racist flight attendant kicks black police officer off the plane and immediately regrets it when she finds out. The New York morning sun shone through the shutters of Marcus Johnson's apartment, creating dancing patterns on the wooden floor. The 38-year-old detective watched the city that never sleeps slowly awaken as he finished packing his suitcase. His tired eyes reflected sleepless nights and endless cases, but a smile stubbornly appeared on his lips. Finally, after years of tireless dedication, he would have his well-deserved rest. Marcus closed his suitcase with a sigh of relief. His calloused hands briefly caressed the leather surface, as if trying to reassure himself that it was real. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember the last few months, the cases solved, the lives saved, the endless nights poring over reports, all that would be behind him, if only for a few weeks. As he left the apartment, Marcus took one last look inside. The bare walls, devoid of family photos or mementos, were a silent testament to a life dedicated to work. For a moment, he felt a pang of loneliness, but it soon passed. This was a new beginning, a chance to rediscover who he was beyond the badge. The cab was waiting for him at the curb, the driver impatiently drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. Marcus threw his suitcase in the trunk and slid into the back seat, the cold leather against his back a physical reminder of the reality of his trip. "JFK Airport, please," he said, his voice hoarse with fatigue but tinged with anticipation. As the cab snaked through the familiar streets of New York, Marcus allowed his thoughts to wander. Los Angeles, sunshine, beaches, a much-needed change of scenery. Maybe there he could finally let his guard down, drop the tough detective mask he had worn for so long. The airport was abuzz with activity when Marcus arrived. Families saying goodbye, executives rushing off with their briefcases, couples reuniting in emotional embraces. For a moment, Marcus felt out of place, a lone observer in this theater of human emotions. After passing through security, Marcus found his boarding gate. He sat down, his suitcase at his feet, and watched the planes take off and land through the window. Each one carried stories, dreams, and fears. For a moment, he wondered what the stories of his fellow passengers were. "Passengers on Flight 1742 to Los Angeles, please proceed to the gate for boarding," a metallic voice announced over the PA system. Marcus stood up, straightening his jacket. As he walked towards the boarding line, he couldn't help but notice the curious looks he was receiving. Perhaps it was his posture, still rigid after years in the police force, or perhaps it was something in his eyes, the constant vigilance of someone used to looking for danger around every corner. On boarding the plane, Marcus was greeted by Sarah Collins, the flight attendant. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something in Sarah's gaze, a mixture of disdain and fear, that made him instantly alert. "Welcome aboard, sir," said Sarah, her voice professional, but with an underlying coldness that didn't go unnoticed by Marcus. Marcus nodded in thanks and made his way down the narrow aisle to his seat. As he settled in, he couldn't help but notice Sarah watching him out of the corner of her eye. Her detective instincts, sharpened by years of experience, were screaming that something was wrong. The flight took off without incident, New York City rapidly diminishing below them. Marcus tried to relax, flipping distractedly through the in-flight magazine, but he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. His eyes kept turning to Sarah, who seemed to be deliberately avoiding his gaze. About an hour after takeoff, Marcus decided to go to the toilet. As he got up, he noticed Sarah whispering something to another flight attendant, her eyes following his every move. Her behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious, and Marcus felt his detective mind kicking in, analyzing every detail. Returning from the restroom, Marcus was surprised by Sarah blocking his path. "Sir, I need you to come with me," she said, her voice firm but with an almost imperceptible tremor. "Is there a problem?" asked Marcus, his hand instinctively going to where his badge would normally be. "Please, sir, don't cause a scene," insisted Sarah, her eyes darting nervously around the cabin. Before Marcus could protest, two burly men appeared at his side, clearly undercover security agents. With a resigned sigh, Marcus allowed them to escort him to the back of the plane. "What's going on here?" demanded Marcus, his voice low but intense. Sarah stared at him, her face a mask of accusation. "You were observed exhibiting suspicious behavior, sir. We have reason to believe that you may pose a threat to the safety of this flight." Marcus was stunned. "That's ridiculous. I'm an NYPD detective." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The pilot had already been informed, and the decision to make an emergency landing had already been made. As the plane began its unscheduled descent, Marcus felt the weight of injustice bear down on him. His long-awaited vacation had turned into a nightmare, and he had no idea why. All he knew was that he had somehow become the target of a plot he didn't understand. The plane landed with a jolt, and Marcus was quickly escorted off. At the terminal, a group of local police officers were waiting for him. As he was taken away, Marcus took one last look at Sarah. What he saw in her eyes was not triumph, but fear. A deep, desperate fear that only added to his confusion. As the doors of the police car closed behind him, Marcus knew that his fight for justice and truth had only just begun. What should have been the beginning of a period of rest had turned into the first chapter of a mystery that he was determined to unravel, no matter the cost. The smell of stale coffee and cheap disinfectant hung in the air of the police station, a familiar mix that Marcus Johnson never imagined he would feel on the other side of the bars. Sitting in the cold, impersonal cell, his cuffed hands rested in his lap, a constant reminder of the injustice he was experiencing. The New York detective, used to being the hunter, now saw himself as the prey. The events of the last few hours flashed through his mind like a slow-motion movie. The absurd accusation of drug trafficking, the look of triumph mixed with fear in the eyes of Sarah Collins, the flight attendant, and the shocking discovery of drugs in her luggage. Marcus knew he was being framed, but why was still a mystery that tormented him. "Johnson," called a deep voice. Marcus looked up to see the local detective, a burly man with eyes as hard as stones. "Time for your interrogation." As he was escorted into the interrogation room, Marcus observed everything around him with trained eyes. Every detail, every expression on the policemen's faces could be a clue. But what intrigued him most was the feeling that something bigger was at play. This didn't seem to be just a case of planted drugs. There was a complexity, a web of intrigue that he still couldn't fully understand. In the interrogation room, Marcus faced hours of aggressive questioning. He stood firm, reiterating his innocence and demanding his right to a lawyer. But behind his calm facade, his mind was working furiously, trying to connect the dots. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, in New York, Detective Lisa Martinez received a call that would change the course of the investigation. "Lisa, it's Marcus. He's in trouble," said the voice on the other end of the line. Lisa felt her heart race. Marcus was more than a colleague. He was a friend, a mentor. "What happened?" she asked, reaching for her jacket and car keys. As she listened to the details of the case, Lisa knew something was wrong. Marcus Johnson was many things: stubborn, sometimes impulsive, but never a criminal. "I'll look into it," she promised, hanging up the phone with renewed determination. Lisa immediately began digging through the airline's records, focusing on Sarah Collins, the flight attendant who had accused Marcus. Hours passed as she delved deep into Sarah's life, looking for any suspicious connection. That's when she found something: a series of suspicious bank deposits in Sarah's account, all coinciding with international flight dates. Lisa felt a shiver run down her spine. This was bigger than she had imagined. Deciding she needed help, Lisa contacted Robert Thompson, an FBI agent she had worked with on previous cases. "Robert, I need your help. It's about Marcus," she said as soon as he picked up. Robert listened attentively as Lisa explained the situation. "This sounds like an international trafficking operation," he concluded, "and it looks like your friend Marcus may have stumbled onto something big." Together, Lisa and Robert began to put the pieces of the puzzle together. They discovered that Sarah Collins had links to a well-known Mexican drug cartel. The flights she worked on were often used to transport drugs, and Marcus had unknowingly become a threat to the operation. "We need to act fast," said Robert. "If this is as big as it looks, Marcus's life is in danger." Meanwhile, back at the police station, Marcus was facing his own personal hell. The hours dragged by, each minute an eternity of uncertainty and frustration. He knew he was being watched, his every move analyzed for signs of guilt. It was during one of these long hours of waiting that Marcus noticed something strange. One of the guards, a young officer who seemed nervous and out of place, slid something into his cell when he thought no one was looking. Marcus waited until he was alone to investigate. It was a small piece of paper with a cryptic message. "They're coming for you. Watch out for the boss." Marcus's heart raced. This confirmed his suspicions that there was something bigger at play. But who was they? And why would the chief of police be involved? While Marcus contemplated the implications of this message, Lisa and Robert were on their way, determined to uncover the truth and free their friend. The clock was ticking, and they knew that every second counted. As night fell, the tension in the police station was palpable. Marcus could sense that something was about to happen. He mentally prepared himself, knowing that the next few moments could determine not only his fate, but also the outcome of a criminal operation much bigger than he could have imagined. Outside, Lisa and Robert were approaching, ready to face whatever they encountered. The battle for truth and justice was just beginning, and neither of them knew exactly what awaited them inside that seemingly ordinary police station. The air was charged with anticipation and danger. Marcus, in his cell, Lisa and Robert in their car, and the conspirators lurking in the shadows, all were preparing for a confrontation that would change their lives forever. The night promised to reveal long-buried secrets and test the limits of loyalty, courage, and determination of everyone involved. As the stars began to dot the night sky, one thing was certain. Before the sun rose again, the truth would come out, no matter the cost. The air in the interrogation room was heavy with tension and anticipation. Robert, the FBI agent, stared at Sarah Collins with a penetrating gaze, his years of experience in interrogations evident in every line of his face. Sarah, for her part, looked a shadow of the confident woman who had accused Marcus on the plane. Her eyes, once full of disdain, now revealed a deep fear and vulnerability that could no longer be hidden. "Sarah," Robert began, his voice calm but firm, "we know about the deposits. We know about your cartel connections. What we don't know is why you chose Marcus Johnson as your scapegoat." Sarah swallowed, her hands trembling slightly on the cold metal table. I had no choice," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They have my family." Robert felt a twinge of compassion but kept his expression neutral. "Who is they, Sarah? We need names." Tears began to form in Sarah's eyes. "The cartel. They approached me a year ago. At first it was just small favors, turning a blind eye to a suspicious suitcase, handing over an envelope here and there. But then..." Her voice faltered, and Robert waited patiently while she gathered the courage to continue. "Then they threatened my sister and her little boy. They said that if I didn't cooperate fully, they..." Sarah couldn't finish the sentence, sobs shaking her body. On the other side of the one-way mirror, Lisa watched the interrogation with a mixture of anger and pity. She could understand Sarah's fear, but she couldn't forgive her for what she had done to Marcus. Meanwhile, in his cell, Marcus was facing his own demons. The cryptic message he had received echoed in his mind. "They're coming for you. Watch out for the boss." Every sound, every movement outside his cell put him on high alert. That's when he heard it. Footsteps approaching, different from the usual ones. Heavier, more determined. Marcus stood up, all his senses heightened. The cell door opened, revealing the chief of police, accompanied by two grim-looking officers Marcus didn't recognize. "Detective Johnson," the chief spoke, his voice a mixture of false cordiality and veiled menace. "Looks like we have a little problem to solve." Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense. "What would that problem be, boss?" he asked, keeping his voice calm despite the imminent danger he felt. The boss smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You see, Johnson, sometimes people find out things they shouldn't, and when that happens, well, accidents happen." At that moment, Marcus fully understood the gravity of his situation. He wasn't just under arrest, he was about to be silenced permanently. Back in the interrogation room, Sarah finally broke down. Between tears, she revealed the details of the cartel's operation, including the names of corrupt officials and the dates of major drug shipments. Robert exchanged a meaningful glance with Lisa through the mirror. They had what they needed, but right now, the priority was Marcus. "Sarah," Robert said, leaning forward, "where is Marcus Johnson now?" Sarah's eyes widened in understanding and horror. "Oh my God," she whispered, "they're going to kill him." Lisa didn't wait any longer. She ran out of the observation room, shouting orders over the radio as she ran towards the cells. Marcus, facing the three men in his cell, knew he was outnumbered and unarmed, but years of training and survival instinct kicked in. When the first officer advanced, Marcus acted. With one swift movement, he dodged the blow, using the man's momentum against himself. The officer fell, hitting his head on the wall with a deafening thud. The second man was more cautious, circling Marcus like a predator. The police chief watched with a cruel smile, confident in his numerical superiority. It was at that moment that chaos erupted. Sirens began to sound, and screams echoed through the corridors. Lisa had triggered the alarm, alerting the entire police station. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, Marcus attacked. His fists found their target with precision, knocking out the second officer. But the police chief was a more formidable opponent. The two men grappled in a ferocious fight, years of repressed anger and corruption showing in every blow exchanged. Marcus felt the taste of blood in his mouth, but he kept fighting, knowing that his life depended on it. It was then that Lisa appeared at the cell door, gun in hand. "Freeze!" she shouted. The police chief, seeing himself cornered, made one last desperate move. He pulled out a concealed weapon, pointing it at Marcus. Time seemed to freeze. Marcus saw the chief's finger squeeze the trigger. He closed his eyes, waiting for the impact. A gunshot echoed through the cell. When Marcus opened his eyes, he saw the chief of police lying on the floor, a bullet wound in his shoulder. Lisa was standing in the doorway, her gun still smoking. "Are you all right?" she asked, rushing to Marcus's aid. He nodded, still dazed by the events. "How did you—" "Long story," Lisa smiled. "Let's get you out of here." As they were escorted out of the police station, Marcus saw Robert leading a team arresting several corrupt officers. Sarah Collins was among them, handcuffed but with an expression of relief on her face. Outside, the rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the last few days slowly dissipate. "What happens now?" he asked Lisa. She smiled, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Now, partner, we do what we do best. We seek the truth and we do justice." As they climbed into Lisa's car, Marcus knew his fight was far from over. But with loyal allies at his side and the truth emerging, he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The day was just beginning, and with it, a new chapter in the quest for justice was about to be written. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the hot asphalt as Marcus, Lisa, and Robert approached the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The air was heavy with the smell of rust and sea spray, a constant reminder of the proximity of the port. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine, not of fear, but of anticipation. After days of intense investigation, they finally had a solid lead on the cartel's center of operations. "Are you sure this is the place?" asked Marcus, his eyes scanning the decrepit building in front of him. Lisa nodded, her face a mask of determination. The informant was quite clear. This is where they store the records of all the transactions. Robert, ever cautious, checked his gun once more. "Remember, we're in hostile territory. Any suspicious movement, we retreat immediately." The three exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. They were more than colleagues now. They were companions united by a common purpose, forged in the fire of adversity. With careful steps, they approached the side entrance to the warehouse. Marcus felt his heart racing, the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. He thought about everything he had been through, the false accusation, the days in prison, the betrayal. Every step towards the truth was a step towards his redemption. Lisa worked the lock with skill, her nimble fingers manipulating the tools with precision. With a soft click, the door opened, revealing the darkness inside. They entered silently, lanterns lighting the way ahead. The warehouse was a maze of stacked boxes and abandoned machinery, shadows dancing on the walls with every movement of its lights. "Over there," whispered Robert, pointing to a door at the back of the warehouse. "That must be the office." As they approached, Marcus felt a change in the air. A sixth sense, honed by years of police work, alerted him that something was wrong. "Wait," he whispered, taking Lisa's arm. "Don't you think it's too quiet?" The moment the words left his lips, all hell broke loose. Blinding lights flooded the warehouse, and the deafening sound of gunfire echoed off the metal walls. Marcus reacted on instinct, pushing Lisa behind a pile of boxes while Robert threw himself behind an old forklift. "It's an ambush!" shouted Robert over the noise. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest, adrenaline now in full force. He risked a quick glance over the crates, counting at least 5 snipers positioned strategically around the warehouse. "Lisa, are you all right?" he asked, his voice tense with concern. "I'm fine," she replied, already holding her gun. "But we're trapped." Marcus knew she was right. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Every second that passed diminished their chances of making it out alive. It was then that he heard it, an almost imperceptible sound amidst the chaos, the creak of a door slowly opening behind them. "Get down!" shouted a familiar voice. Without hesitating, Marcus pulled Lisa to the ground just as a burst of gunfire passed over their heads, hitting 2 of the gunmen surrounding them. Turning around, Marcus saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was the young officer who had left the message in his cell days ago. "This way!" the officer shouted, pointing to a half-hidden emergency exit. There was no time to question. Marcus signaled to Robert and the 3 of them ran towards the exit, the providential officer covering their retreat. They emerged into a dark alleyway, the sound of sirens in the distance growing louder by the second. "Who are you?" asked Lisa, still panting from her escape. The young officer smiled shyly. Officer Mike Thompson, I... I've been watching you. I knew you were close to discovering the truth, but I also knew that the cartel was watching you. Marcus studied the young man's face, seeing in it a mixture of fear and determination. Why help us? You're putting yourself at risk. Mike hesitated for a moment before answering. My father was a policeman. He was killed for refusing to accept bribes from the cartel. I joined the force to make a difference, but it's hard when you're alone. The sound of sirens was closer now. Robert, ever practical, interrupted the moment. We need to get out of here. Do we have a safe place? Lisa nodded. My apartment. It's under an assumed name, so it should be safe for now. As they walked quickly away from the scene, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the night's events. They had narrowly escaped, but the truth still seemed out of reach. And now, with Mike, they had a new ally, and possibly a new responsibility. At Lisa's apartment, hours later, the group gathered around the kitchen table, cups of strong coffee in their hands, maps and documents spread out in front of them. What do we know? Asked Robert, his voice tired but determined. Marcus sighed, wiping his hand across his face. We know that the cartel has deep roots in the local police. We know they're willing to do anything to stop us, and we know we're running out of time. Lisa, who had been silent for a while, finally spoke. Maybe we're going about this the wrong way. What if, instead of trying to get everyone at once, we focused on publicly exposing what we know? Mike, who had been quiet until then, perked up at the idea. A press conference? That could work, if we could gather all the evidence and present it all at once. Marcus felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. It could work, but we'd have to be quick and careful. The moment we announce the press conference, we'll have a target on our backs. Robert nodded slowly. It's risky, but it could be our best chance. We need to prepare everything meticulously. As the group began to plan their next move, Marcus looked out of the window at the sleeping city outside. He knew that the next few days would be crucial. The truth was within reach, but the price to reach it could be high. With one last look at his companions, Marcus silently committed himself to seeing this through to the end, no matter the cost. Justice was waiting, and he was determined to deliver it. The town hall auditorium buzzed with the nervous energy of dozens of journalists and curious citizens. Cameras flashed incessantly, microphones were adjusted, and the buzz of anxious conversations filled the air. At the center of all this commotion, Marcus Johnson found himself alone backstage, his heart beating hard against his ribs. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the memories of the last few days flood his mind. The escape from the warehouse, the sleepless nights planning every detail of this press conference, the constant fear of being discovered. Every moment had brought him to this crucial point. Are you ready? Lisa's soft voice brought him back to the present. Marcus opened his eyes, meeting his partner's worried gaze. As ready as I can be, he replied with a tense smile. Lisa squeezed his shoulder gently. Remember, we're all here with you. Robert is monitoring the entrances and Mike is keeping an eye out for any suspicious movement in the audience. Marcus nodded, grateful for the reassuring presence of his team. Together, they had faced the impossible and were now about to expose one of the biggest corruption and trafficking operations the city had ever seen. With one last deep breath, Marcus walked to the podium. The flash of the cameras momentarily blinded him, and the noise of the crowd dwindled to an expectant silence. Good afternoon, he began, his voice steady despite the nervousness he felt. My name is Marcus Johnson, a detective with the New York Police Department. I'm here today to reveal a truth that has been buried for far too long. As Marcus spoke, detailing the evidence of corruption and drug trafficking they had uncovered, he watched the audience's reactions carefully. Some faces showed shock, others indignation, and some, he noted with concern, looked nervous, almost guilty. It was then that he saw it. A subtle movement at the back of the room. A man in a dark suit reaching inside his jacket. Marcus felt time slow down, his police instincts taking over. "Get down!" he shouted, throwing himself to the side of the podium just as a gunshot echoed through the auditorium. Chaos ensued instantly. Screams filled the air, people ran in all directions, and more shots were fired. Marcus saw Lisa running towards the shooter, her gun already in her hand. In the midst of the confusion, Marcus spotted a familiar figure trying to escape through a side exit. It was Sarah Collins, the flight attendant who had initially accused him. Without hesitation, he launched into pursuit. "Sarah!" he shouted, pushing his way through the panicked crowd. Sarah looked back, fear evident in her eyes before turning a corner and disappearing from sight. Marcus followed her, his heart hammering in his ears. He caught up with her at a dead end, panting and shaking. "It's over, Sarah," said Marcus, approaching cautiously. "There's nowhere left to run." Sarah turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "They're going to kill my family. I had no choice." Marcus felt a wave of compassion despite everything he had been through. "There is still a choice, Sarah. You can do the right thing now. Help us end this once and for all." For a long moment Sarah stared at him, the conflict evident in her eyes. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything." Back in the auditorium, the situation had been brought under control. The shooter was in custody, and the police were taking witness statements. Marcus returned with Sarah, finding Lisa and Robert in the middle of the chaos. "She wants to cooperate," Marcus explained. "I think we can finally dismantle this whole operation." In the hours that followed, Sarah revealed crucial details about the cartel's operation, including the names of high-ranking corrupt officials and information about a large shipment of drugs that was scheduled to arrive soon. With this information in hand, Marcus and his team worked tirelessly, coordinating with federal agencies to plan a large-scale operation. Days later, on a moonless night, Marcus found himself crouched behind a container at the port, his heart racing with anticipation. Next to him, Lisa and Robert were waiting for the signal, their tense expressions reflecting the gravity of the moment. "Alpha Team in position," came Mike's voice over the radio. "The ship is docking now." Marcus exchanged a glance with his companions. This was the moment that would define everything. Months of investigation, danger, and personal sacrifice were culminating tonight. "Let's get this over with," said Marcus, his voice laden with determination. When the signal was given, they advanced like a relentless wave. The sound of sirens filled the air, mixed with cries of surprise and the sound of gunfire. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus spotted a familiar figure trying to escape, the corrupt police chief who had tried to silence him days before. With fierce determination, Marcus pursued him, jumping over boxes and dodging stray bullets. Finally, he cornered him against a wall of containers. "It's over," said Marcus, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "It's time to face justice." The police chief stared at him with a mixture of anger and defeat. Slowly, he let his gun fall to the ground. As the handcuffs were put on, Marcus felt an immense weight leave his shoulders. The truth had finally come out, and justice was being served. Hours later, with the sunrise painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, Marcus found himself alone on the edge of the pier. He watched the gentle waves, reflecting on everything that had happened. A gentle hand touched his shoulder. It was Lisa, her face showing the same tiredness and relief he felt. "We did it," she said simply. Marcus nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Yes, we did it." As the new day dawned, bringing with it the promise of a brighter and fairer future, Marcus knew that his journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, he felt truly at peace. The truth had triumphed, and with it, the hope of a better tomorrow. The morning sun filtered through the shutters of Marcus Johnson's office, casting golden stripes across the pile of papers on his desk. The detective gazed out of the window, watching the city slowly awaken. Weeks had passed since the operation at the port, and New York seemed to breathe a little more freely, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from its shoulders. Marcus picked up his cup of coffee, feeling the comforting aroma fill his senses. He reflected on the events that had brought him here, the unjust accusation, the dark days in prison, the fight for the truth. Every moment, every challenge had shaped not only the case, but also the man he had become. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, turning to see Lisa enter, a tired but satisfied smile on her face. "Morning, partner," she said, handing him a folder. "The latest operation reports. I thought you might like to have a look before the meeting with the commissioner." Marcus nodded, leafing through the documents. Names, dates, evidence, all there in black and white. The extent of the corruption they had dismantled was impressive and, at the same time, disturbing. "How's Sarah?" asked Marcus, his voice softening at the mention of the former flight attendant. Lisa sighed, taking a seat in the chair opposite the table. "She's cooperating fully. Her testimony was crucial in closing several pending cases. The prosecutor is considering a sentence reduction in exchange for her continued cooperation." Marcus nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Sarah had been both victim and accomplice, a painful reminder of how circumstances can lead good people to make terrible choices. "What about Mike?" asked Marcus, remembering the young officer who had risked everything to help them. A genuine smile lit up Lisa's face. "He's doing well. The department recommended him for an advanced training program. It looks like we'll have a new detective soon." Marcus couldn't hold back a proud smile. Mike represented hope, proof that, even in the darkest times, there were still those willing to stand up for what's right. The phone on Marcus's desk rang, interrupting the moment. It was Robert, the FBI agent who had become an indispensable ally during the investigation. "Marcus," Robert's voice sounded urgent through the speaker. "We have a situation. The police chief. He wants to talk." Marcus and Lisa exchanged worried glances. The former police chief, now in jail awaiting trial, had maintained an obstinate silence since his arrest. "We're on our way," Marcus replied, getting up and grabbing his coat. The drive to the prison was tense, filled with speculation about what might have prompted the man to break his silence now. When they arrived, they were immediately taken to the interrogation room. The former police chief seemed to have aged years in just a few weeks. His eyes, once full of arrogance, now bore the weight of his crimes and the consequences of his choices. "Johnson," he greeted, his voice hoarse. I needed to talk to you." Marcus sat opposite him, maintaining a neutral expression. "I'm listening." The man hesitated, as if the words were difficult to form. "I wanted to apologize for everything, not just for what I did to you, but for every life I ruined, every officer I corrupted." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the words hanging in the air. Marcus studied the man's face, looking for signs of manipulation or deceit. But all he saw was genuine regret and a deep sadness. "Why now?" asked Marcus, his voice calm but firm. The former boss sighed deeply. "Because I've realized that silence only perpetuates evil. Because I want to do something right, even if it's the last thing I do." He looked Marcus straight in the eye. "I have information. about operations that go beyond this city, beyond this country, and I'm ready to tell you everything. In the hours that followed, Marcus, Lisa, and Robert heard revelations that would shake the foundations of several international criminal organizations. The former police chief, in his final act of redemption, was offering the key to dismantling a network of corruption that stretched across continents. As they left the prison, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the night air. "Are you all right?" asked Lisa, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I am. It's a lot to process." Robert joined them, his face showing the weariness of a long day, but also the determination of someone who knows there's more work to be done. "This is going to change a lot of things. We're about to open a Pandora's box." Marcus looked at his companions, feeling a wave of gratitude for having them by his side on this journey. "Then we'd better get started," he said, a small smile forming on his lips. Days later, in his apartment, Marcus was sitting in his favorite armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, reflecting on everything that had happened. His gaze wandered to a framed photo on the bookshelf. He and his team, smiling tiredly but triumphantly after the operation at the port. He thought of Sarah, her fight to protect her family, and her eventual act of courage in telling the truth. He thought of Mike, the young officer who risked everything for justice, of the former chief of police, whose confession could save countless lives. Marcus realized that each of them, including himself, had gone through a journey of redemption. They had all faced difficult choices, made mistakes, but in the end, they had chosen to do the right thing. A soft knock on the door brought him out of his thoughts. It was Lisa, carrying a thick folder. "New information from the FBI," she said, a glint of excitement in her eyes. "Looks like we've got another case to solve." Marcus smiled, setting his glass aside and getting up. As he prepared to dive into a new mystery, he felt a sense of renewed purpose. The journey wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, he knew he wasn't alone. With loyal allies at his side and the truth as his compass, Marcus was ready to face any challenge the future might bring. As night fell over New York, Marcus Johnson, the detective who had stood up to injustice and triumphed, took to the streets of the city. Not as a victim, not as an accused, but as a guardian of justice, ready to write the next chapter of his story. The case was over, but the search for truth and justice continued. And Marcus couldn't have been more prepared for what was to follow. If you enjoyed this story, I invite you to like and subscribe to my channel. Your support motivates me to keep sharing exciting stories nearly every day. Don't miss the next amazing story that's about to unfold on your screen. I greatly appreciate your backing. Hope to see you soon.